This week we have two scary tales from the woods.
The path narrowed, the once friendly sunlight swallowed by a canopy of ancient gnarled trees. Their branches, thick with moss and lichen, twisted like arthritic fingers, reaching, always reaching. A chill, deeper than the autumn air, settled on Alara's skin. She'd ignored the warnings, the whispered tales of the whispering woods, opting instead for a shortcut home. The first sound was a rustle, a dry, papery whisper that seemed to emanate from the very ground. She stopped, her breath catching in her throat, scanning the dense undergrowth. Nothing, just the shadows, playing tricks. Then came the voice, a low, guttural murmur that slithered through the trees. It wasn't a word, not exactly, but a drawn-out, sibilant sound, like air escaping a punctured lung. It was the sound of something old, something patient. Ilara started to run, her boots crunching on fallen leaves. The sound amplified in the oppressive silence. The whispering intensified, growing louder, closer. It was a chorus now, a symphony of dry, rasping breaths. She stumbled, her hand landing on something cold and smooth. It was a stone, or so she thought, until it moved, a slow, deliberate shift. She yanked her hand away, her heart hammering against her ribs. The stone, now revealed in a sliver of moonlight filtering through the branches, wasn't a stone at all. It was an eye, large and milky white, staring up at her from the forest floor. Panic seized her. She scrambled to her feet, her eyes darting through the darkness. The whispering was everywhere, a suffocating blanket of sound. Then she saw them. Figures, tall and gaunt, their forms obscured by the shadows, but their eyes glowing with an eerie, phosphorescent light. They moved with an unsettling fluidity, their limbs bending at unnatural angles, their feet barely touching the ground. One of them stepped forward, its face hidden in the darkness, but its voice, a dry, rustling whisper, filled the air. "Lost, little one?" Alara couldn't speak. She could only stare, her body frozen with terror. Another figure emerged, its hand extending towards her. Its fingers were long and slender, tipped with sharp black nails that gleamed in the dim light. "We can help you find your way," it whispered, its voice like the rustling of dead leaves. She tried to back away, but her feet were rooted to the spot. The figures closed in, their eyes glowing brighter, their whispers growing louder, a cacophony of sibilant sounds that echoed through the woods. One of them reached out and touched her cheek, its fingers cold and dry, like brittle twigs. The touch sent a shiver of icy fear through her body. "You'll never leave," it whispered, its voice a promise and a threat. The world dissolved into a blur of shadows and whispers. Ilara felt herself being pulled down, down into the darkness, the sounds of the forest fading into a distant, mocking echo. The last thing she saw was the milky white eye, staring up at her from the forest floor, its gaze fixed, unblinking, and utterly devoid of warmth.
The Whistler in the Woods. It started as a simple camping trip, just me and a couple of friends looking to escape the noise of the city for a weekend. We packed light, drove deep into the wilderness, and set up camp near a quiet, moonlit clearing surrounded by towering pines. The first night was peaceful. The fire crackled and we laughed over old memories. But as the hours passed and the fire dimmed, the woods around us seemed to shift. The night felt heavier. That's when we heard it. A whistle. It wasn't a bird or the wind. It was deliberate. 3 short notes, clear and crisp, echoing through the trees. We fell silent, glancing at each other. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered. "Probably just another camper," Mark muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. But we all knew. We hadn't seen another soul for miles. The whistling came again, this time closer. 3 short notes, identical to the first. A chill ran down my spine. "Hello," I called out, my voice swallowed by the darkness. No response. Just the rustling of leaves and the faint crack of a branch snapping. We decided to ignore it, brushing it off as paranoia. But deep down, we knew something was off. We retreated to our tents, zipping them tight, trying to sleep. Then at 3 a.m., I woke up. There was no sound, no wind, no insects. Just silence. And then, right outside my tent, a whistle. 3 short notes. My breath caught in my throat. The sound was so close, as if someone was standing right outside my tent. I dared not move. Then, the sound of something brushing against the fabric. Slow, deliberate. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping my sleeping bag. The whistling started again, this time right next to Sarah's tent. She screamed. In a panic, I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped my tent, shining the beam toward hers. The flap was open, and Sarah was gone. Mark burst from his tent, wild-eyed. "Where is she?" The whistling moved again, this time from deeper in the woods. The same 3 notes drawing us forward. We hesitated, fear gripping us. Then we saw her. Sarah stood just beyond the tree line, completely still. Her back was to us, her arms hanging limply at her sides. The beam of my flashlight shook as I stepped toward her. "Sarah." She didn't move. I reached out, just a few inches from her shoulder, when she suddenly turned. Her face wasn't her own. Her mouth was twisted unnaturally wide, her eyes hollow pits of darkness. And from her gaping maw, she whistled. 3 short notes. The light flickered, and everything went black. By the time Mark and I woke up, we were back at our campsite. No sign of Sarah. No footprints, no struggle. Just silence. We ran, left everything behind, drove straight back to civilization. The police never found her. The official report labeled it as a disappearance in the wilderness. But we know the truth. Somewhere in those woods, something took her, and on quiet nights, I still hear the whistling. 3 short notes, calling me back.